Having money too early can be a disadvantage, not because money is bad, but because it hides the truth. When you have some money, you start protecting it. You defend small comforts. You maintain habits that feel normal but quietly limit you. You make decisions to avoid discomfort, not to build freedom. Scarcity forces clarity. Comfort delays it. Most people don't fail because they lack opportunity. They fail because their thinking is shaped by what they're trying to protect. This video is not about how to make money. It's about how to think when there is nothing to defend and everything to build. Most advice starts with tactics, side hustles, investments, skills you should learn. But tactics without the right mental foundation only create more noise. You can copy strategies endlessly and still move nowhere, because the problem is rarely effort, it's orientation. Most people are asking the wrong question. They ask, what should I do to make money? That question assumes money is the starting point. It isn't. The starting point is how you see the world. If your thinking is short-term, every tactic becomes a trap. If your thinking is reactive, every opportunity looks urgent. If your thinking is built on fear, even success feels fragile. So instead of tactics, we're going to talk about something quieter, a way of thinking. A lens that changes how you interpret time, effort, risk, and progress. Because when your lens changes, your decisions change automatically. You don't need discipline. You don't need motivation. You don't need willpower. You need clarity. If I started again with $0 today, I would not rush to escape that position. I wouldn't try to look successful. I wouldn't chase fast wins. I wouldn't optimize for income first. I would optimize for freedom of thought. Because freedom doesn't start with money. It starts with not being owned by urgency. Most people with nothing feel pressure. Most people with something feel fear. Both are the same trap. Pressure makes you impatient. Fear makes you conservative. Neither builds long-term wealth. Real leverage comes from calm, rational decision-making over long periods of time. And calm is rare, especially in a world designed to keep you reactive. This is why most content feels exhausting. It's either selling hope or selling fear. Here we do neither. There is no promise of quick results, no dramatic transformation, no secret knowledge, only clear thinking. The kind of thinking that compounds, slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. By the end of this video, you won't have a checklist, you won't have a plan to copy, but you will have something more valuable. A framework for deciding what deserves your time and what doesn't. A way to stop making decisions from anxiety and start making them from understanding. This is not about getting rich. It's about removing the mental traps that keep people poor, even when opportunities are everywhere. If I started with $0, this is not what I would do. This is how I would think. Starting from $0 is often described as a disadvantage, but that description is shallow. It focuses on the surface-level absence of money while ignoring the deeper structural reality. $0 removes friction. When there is nothing to protect, there is nothing distorting your decisions. The problem is that most people never experience true $0. They experience a fragile middle state where there is just enough income, just enough status, and just enough responsibility to make change feel dangerous. That middle state is far more psychologically restrictive than having nothing at all. $0 eliminates reputation pressure. When you have a job title, a predictable income, or a social identity tied to what you do, your decisions become performative. You start asking not what is correct, but what is acceptable. You optimize for explanations you can give to others rather than outcomes that serve you long term. With $0, there is no audience to satisfy, no narrative to maintain, no image to protect. This absence creates an unusual freedom, the ability to choose poorly in the short term without permanent social consequences. That freedom is essential for experimentation, and experimentation is the foundation of all nonlinear progress. $0 also removes fixed costs, and fixed costs are one of the most underestimated psychological traps. When your monthly obligations are high, your mind becomes defensive. Every decision is filtered through the question, will this cover my expenses? That filter narrows your thinking. It pushes you toward predictable outcomes and away from asymmetric opportunities. With minimal obligations, the mind opens. You can afford to wait, you can afford to learn, you can afford to try something that may not pay immediately, but has a higher ceiling. This is not a financial advantage, it is a cognitive one. Another overlooked advantage of zero is the ability to change direction without friction. People with partial success are often trapped by their own momentum. They have invested time, education, and identity into a path that is no longer optimal, but abandoning it feels like admitting failure. Zero has no such inertia. When nothing is built, nothing has to be dismantled. You are free to pivot radically, not incrementally. This ability to make sharp turns is rare and valuable in environments that change faster than careers can adapt. Despite these advantages, starting from zero feels terrifying because of urgency. Urgency is not created by the absence of money itself. It is created by uncertainty combined with pressure. When the future feels unclear and the present feels uncomfortable, the brain seeks immediate relief. This is where the psychology of scarcity begins to dominate behavior. Scarcity does not just describe a lack of resources. It describes a mental state where short-term survival crowds out long-term reasoning. Under scarcity, attention narrows. The brain becomes preoccupied with immediate threats and rewards. This phenomenon, sometimes called cognitive bandwidth tax, reduces the capacity for planning, reflection, and abstraction. People under financial stress are not less intelligent. They are overloaded. Their mental resources are consumed by constant micro-decisions, bills, deadlines, obligations, and social expectations. In this state, long-term thinking is not merely difficult, it is neurologically deprioritized. This is why advice that focuses purely on discipline or hustle often fails people starting from zero. The problem is not laziness. The problem is that urgency hijacks cognition. When the brain is under stress, it defaults to familiar patterns and immediate rewards. This leads to predictable behavior, choosing quick money over foundational skills, choosing certainty over leverage, choosing relief over progress. These choices feel rational in the moment, but they compound into stagnation. The trap of urgency is subtle because it disguises itself as responsibility. It convinces people that taking the first available option is prudent, that waiting is risky, and that learning is indulgent. Someone might take a job they dislike, not because it aligns with their goals, but because it reduces anxiety today. Another person might jump into a crowded market with low margins because it promises fast cash, even if it offers no long-term advantage. These decisions are not foolish, they are stress responses. Breaking this cycle requires separating survival from growth in your thinking. Survival is about maintaining basic stability. Growth is about positioning for future optionality. When these two are conflated, urgency dominates. Every action becomes about immediate payoff. The way out is not to eliminate urgency entirely, that is unrealistic, but to contain it. This means creating psychological and practical buffers, even small ones, that allow the mind to breathe. One of the most effective ways to reduce urgency is to reframe zero not as a deficit, but as a temporary operating mode. Zero is not an identity, it is a phase. When you stop treating it as a personal failure, it loses its emotional charge. This shift alone can restore cognitive bandwidth. Instead of asking, how do I escape this as fast as possible, you begin to ask, what is this phase enabling me to do that I won't be able to do later? That question opens space for strategic thinking. Another method is to deliberately slow decision-making. Urgency thrives on speed. It pushes you to act before you think, to commit before you understand. By imposing artificial delays on major decisions, waiting a week before accepting an opportunity, writing out second-order consequences, or considering what happens if nothing changes, you interrupt the urgency loop. This is not procrastination. It is defense against reactive behavior. Consider two abstract but common situations. One person, under pressure, chooses a short-term contract that pays immediately but leaves no time to learn or build. The income solves today's anxiety but creates tomorrow's stagnation. Another person accepts a lower-paying, more flexible arrangement that allows them to develop a rare skill. The first choice feels safer. The second looks irresponsible to outsiders. Over time, the second person accumulates leverage while the first remains trapped in a cycle of constant urgency. The difference is not intelligence or effort, it is time horizon. Urgency also distorts risk perception. When you feel behind, every action feels risky, even when the downside is limited. This leads to over-optimization and under-exploration. People stick to known paths not because they are optimal, but because they are familiar. Zero, paradoxically, lowers real risk because there is less to lose. When this is understood intellectually and emotionally, behavior changes. Exploration becomes possible again. The final and most important point is this: calm is a prerequisite for long-term thinking. Calm is not a personality trait. It is a state that can be cultivated. It emerges when urgency is contained and when zero is reinterpreted as freedom rather than failure. Without calm, every plan collapses under pressure. With calm, even imperfect decisions compound positively over time. This is why the psychology of zero matters more than any tactic. Before income, before skills, before strategy, there must be a mental environment where rational thought is possible. Zero can provide that environment if you allow it to. If you don't, urgency will turn it into a trap. The difference is not external. It is entirely in how you think. Time is the only form of capital that every person starts with, regardless of circumstances. Money can be lost, borrowed, inherited, or earned. Reputation can be rebuilt. Skills can be learned later in life. But time moves in one direction only, and once it passes, it cannot be recovered. This is why time is not merely a resource. It is the substrate on which all other forms of capital are built. Most people do not consciously waste time. They dissolve it. They let it leak away in small, socially acceptable increments. Minutes spent scrolling, hours spent reacting, days spent busy without direction. The tragedy is not that time is lost, but that it is lost without intention. When you start from zero, time becomes visible. There is no financial cushion to hide behind, no surplus to mask inefficiency. Every hour feels heavier because its opportunity cost is higher. This discomfort is often interpreted as pressure, but it is actually information. It reveals how time is being used versus how it could be invested. There is a fundamental difference between spending time and investing time. Spending time produces relief. Investing time produces optionality. Most people spend time because spending is easy. It feels productive. It creates motion. It provides distraction from uncertainty. Investing time, by contrast, feels uncomfortable. It often produces no immediate feedback. It requires solitude, focus, and delayed gratification. This is why so few people do it consistently. When time is spent, it disappears. When time is invested, it transforms. The return on time investment is not linear. At first, it appears negligible. Learning feels slow. Progress feels invisible. Results feel distant. This is where most people abandon the process. They conclude that nothing is happening. In reality, something is compounding beneath the surface. The early phase of time investment is quiet. There are no external rewards, no social validation, no clear metrics of success. This silence is misinterpreted as failure, but silence is not absence. It is incubation. One of the primary reasons people waste time is fear of stillness. Silence forces thought. Thought forces confrontation with uncertainty. Uncertainty exposes responsibility. It is easier to consume noise than to sit with unresolved questions. Modern environments are optimized to exploit this avoidance. News cycles, notifications, endless content, and constant updates create a background hum that feels harmless. In reality, this noise functions like a tax on attention. Every interruption fragments thought. Every fragment reduces depth. When starting from zero, this tax becomes catastrophic. Attention is the only asset that can be converted into learning, skill, and leverage. To waste it is to delay progress indefinitely. This is why information hygiene matters more than motivation. Most people believe they need more discipline. What they actually need is less noise. The difference between signal and noise is not volume, it is relevance over time. Signal endures, noise expires. News is noise because it has no shelf life. Trends are noise because they decay quickly. Most social commentary is noise because it reacts rather than explains. Signal consists of ideas that remain useful regardless of context. Principles, mental models, foundational knowledge. Economics explains incentives long after headlines change. Psychology explains behavior across generations. Systems thinking explains outcomes beyond individual events. When starting from zero, you must be aggressive in filtering information. This does not mean ignorance. It means selectivity. Every piece of information consumed should justify its existence by improving decision quality. If it does not, it is noise. Noise creates the illusion of awareness while eroding understanding. This is why people can feel informed and still make poor decisions. They are reacting to surface-level signals without grasping underlying structure. To invest time effectively, the environment must be shaped intentionally. This includes physical space, digital inputs, and social exposure. A noisy environment produces shallow thinking. A quiet environment allows depth to emerge. Depth is where leverage begins. One of the most practical tools for reclaiming time is the concept of the golden hour. Not as a productivity hack, but as a psychological boundary. The golden hour is not defined by clock time. It is defined by priority. It is the first uninterrupted block of focused attention each day dedicated to building the future rather than maintaining the present. For someone starting from zero, this hour is sacred. It may occur early in the morning before obligations begin. It may occur late at night after responsibilities end. Its placement is less important than its consistency. During this hour, no consumption is allowed. No news, no social media, no passive input. Only creation, learning, or deep thinking. This hour compounds because it is immune to urgency. Even if the rest of the day is spent on survival, this hour ensures forward motion. Over weeks, it creates momentum. Over months, it creates skill. Over years, it creates leverage. The mistake many people make is waiting for ideal conditions to begin investing time. They wait for more money, more stability, more confidence. But ideal conditions never arrive. Time investment must begin inside constraint, not after it. This is why the golden hour works. It does not require freedom. It creates it. Learning itself compounds like capital. Early understanding enables faster acquisition later. Concepts stack, mental models interlock. Someone who invests an hour a day in learning builds an internal framework that accelerates all future learning. This acceleration is invisible to outsiders. It looks like luck when results appear, but it is simply compounded preparation. Managing time is ultimately about managing energy and attention. Hours without focus are worthless. Short periods of deep concentration outperform long periods of distraction. This is why working longer hours often produces diminishing returns. Fatigue erodes judgment, stress narrows perspective. Time investment must therefore respect cognitive limits. Quality matters more than quantity. This is not an argument for idleness. It is an argument for intention. Every hour should answer one question. Is this maintaining my current state or building my future capacity? Maintenance is necessary, but growth is optional. Those who start from zero and escape it do so not by working endlessly, but by allocating time differently. They protect blocks of focused effort even when it feels inconvenient. They tolerate slow beginnings. They resist the urge to measure progress daily. They understand that time, when invested correctly, solves problems before they appear. In the absence of capital, time is the only lever available. Used poorly, it disappears. Used well, it becomes everything. This is why time is the only real capital. The world rewards leverage, not effort. This statement sounds provocative only because most people were educated in systems that still pretend otherwise. For decades, effort and time were the dominant currencies. You showed up, you worked harder than others, you stayed longer, and in return you received incremental rewards. That model has not disappeared entirely, but it has been eclipsed. The modern economy does not primarily pay for hours. It pays for outcomes, multiplied by how far those outcomes can travel without additional input from you. That multiplier is leverage. True leverage begins with understanding the difference between labor and non-linear inputs. Labor is constrained by time and physical presence. You trade hours for compensation, and once those hours are exhausted, production stops. Capital, in its traditional sense, solves this by allowing money to work without continuous effort. But capital itself is gated. It requires prior accumulation, access, and often permission. This makes it inaccessible to those starting from zero. What has changed is the emergence of new forms of leverage that do not require money, credentials, or institutional approval. Code and content are the most powerful of these because they scale independently of time and permission. Code is leverage because it allows a single individual to create systems that perform work repeatedly without supervision. A program does not get tired. It does not negotiate. It executes logic consistently at scale. Programming converts effort into an asset. Once created, that asset can operate without you being present. This breaks the direct link between time and output. A small piece of well-written code can replace hours of repetitive labor. It can coordinate complex processes without human intervention. It can scale globally with minimal friction. This is why the economic value of programming is not proportional to the time spent coding. It is proportional to the scope of the problem it solves. A single solution, if well designed, can serve millions. This asymmetry is the essence of leverage. Content operates on a similar principle, but at the level of ideas rather than systems. A well-articulated idea can influence thousands or millions of minds long after it is created. Content is leverage because ideas do not decay the way effort does. They persist, they propagate, they compound. Both code and content share a critical property. They can be produced once and distributed infinitely at near zero marginal cost. This is why they are described as permissionless. No gatekeeper needs to approve their existence. No manager needs to assign their reach. They simply exist and propagate. This removes a historical bottleneck. For most of history, scale required institutions. Now it requires clarity and distribution. Most people misunderstand leverage because they confuse it with delegation. Hiring people, managing teams, and building organizations are forms of leverage, but they are fragile. They require coordination. They require incentives. They require constant oversight. They introduce complexity and human unpredictability. As scale increases, so does fragility. Permissionless leverage, by contrast, reduces dependency. It allows output to scale without proportional increases in responsibility. This is not about avoiding work. It is about choosing work that compounds instead of depletes. The implication of this shift is profound. In a world dominated by leverage, the most valuable skills are not those that make you efficient at following instructions. They are those that allow you to create assets that operate independently. This is why certain skills have no ceiling. Writing, programming, and public speaking are not valuable because they are fashionable. They are valuable because they interface directly with leverage. Writing allows ideas to travel. It converts thought into something portable, something scalable. Writing forces clarity, and clarity is a prerequisite for scalable impact. A clearly written idea can be read by one person or 1 million without additional effort. Over time, writing builds a body of work that functions as an intellectual asset. It attracts opportunities not because it demands attention, but because it demonstrates understanding. People trust those who can articulate reality without distortion. Programming operates on the same principle, but with systems instead of ideas. It translates logic into execution. It replaces repetition with automation. The value of code lies in its durability. Once deployed, it performs regardless of mood, energy, or motivation. This is why programming scales so efficiently. It removes humans from the loop where they are unnecessary. It preserves precision while reducing cost. Public speaking completes the triad by compressing trust formation. Humans are social creatures. We respond to coherence, confidence, and clarity expressed in real time. Speaking well allows complex ideas to be transmitted quickly. It allows alignment to form without prolonged explanation. In a leveraged world, influence is not about persuasion in the manipulative sense. It is about reducing confusion. Those who reduce confusion become natural hubs of coordination. Underlying all of these skills is the concept of specific knowledge. Specific knowledge is not taught in classrooms. It cannot be outsourced easily. It is the intersection of your natural curiosities, your lived experience, and the problems you find intrinsically interesting. It often feels like play to you and like work to others. This is why it is valuable. Because it cannot be standardized, it cannot be easily replicated. Markets reward what is rare and hard to copy. Specific knowledge fits both criteria. The mistake many people make is trying to acquire leverage before they understand themselves. They chase whatever skill appears lucrative, even if it feels alien. This leads to mediocrity. Leverage amplifies what already exists. If the underlying skill is shallow, the amplification only reveals its limitations. This is why sustainable leverage must be built on alignment. When effort feels natural rather than forced, consistency becomes possible. Consistency, over time, produces mastery. Mastery attracts leverage. One of the most transformative aspects of modern leverage is the ability to scale without managing people. Historically, influence required hierarchy. You needed layers of management to coordinate large efforts. Today, platforms, automation, and media allow individuals to bypass these structures. A single person with a clear voice and a distribution channel can reach more people than entire organizations once could. This does not eliminate the value of collaboration, but it changes its necessity. Scale no longer requires headcount. This shift explains why traditional notions of hard work are increasingly insufficient. Hard work without leverage leads to exhaustion. It produces linear returns in a non-linear environment. People who work the longest hours often feel the most trapped. Their output is tightly coupled to their presence. When they stop, everything stops. This creates fragility. True wealth, by contrast, is resilient. It continues to generate value even when you step away. The modern economy quietly punishes effort that is not leveraged, not immediately, but over time. People who rely solely on labor find themselves competing with others willing to work longer hours or accept lower compensation. This race has no finish line. Meanwhile, those who invest in leverage experience increasing returns. Their early work creates a foundation that supports future output. Each new contribution builds on the last. Understanding leverage reframes ambition. The goal is no longer to be busy, but to be effective. It is no longer to maximize activity, but to maximize impact per unit of effort. This requires patience. Leverage compounds slowly at first. Early efforts may feel insignificant, a piece of writing read by 10 people, a small tool used by a handful, but leverage is exponential, not linear. Growth appears suddenly, after a long period of invisibility. Building leverage without permission is ultimately about reclaiming agency. It is about choosing inputs that scale, learning skills that travel, creating assets that persist. It requires a willingness to ignore conventional metrics of success. It requires tolerance for delayed gratification. But for those starting from zero, it offers something no traditional path can provide: the ability to build power quietly, independently, on your own terms. In a world that no longer pays for hours, but for outcomes multiplied by leverage, this understanding is not optional. It is the dividing line between those who burn out and those who compound. Results in life almost always arrive later than we expect, not because we are wrong to hope, but because compounding is invisible while it is happening. Most people abandon the process not because it failed, but because nothing obvious happened fast enough. They mistake silence for stagnation. In reality, silence is often the sound of progress accumulating beneath the surface. The most important returns in life are back-heavy. They cluster toward the end of the effort, not the beginning. Learning works this way, trust works this way, reputation works this way. You invest time, energy, and focus for years, and the visible payoff arrives suddenly, almost unfairly. From the outside, it looks like luck. From the inside, it feels overdue. This asymmetry is why patience is so rare. The human brain evolved to respond to immediate feedback. Long delays feel like failure. They trigger doubt. They invite distraction. Most people quit precisely at the point where the curve is about to bend upward. The early stages of any meaningful pursuit feel inefficient. You work without recognition. You build without validation. You improve without applause. There is no social proof to reassure you that you are on the right path. This is not a flaw in the process. It is the filter. Back-heavy returns protect valuable outcomes from crowds. If results were immediate, everyone would persist. Delay is what separates those who endure from those who imitate. This is why the long game is uncomfortable. It requires faith without evidence, commitment without applause, consistency without reassurance. It asks you to trust structure over sensation. Most people optimize for short-term feedback because it feels safe. They choose paths with frequent rewards, even if those rewards are small. Over time, this preference becomes a trap. Short-term optimization creates long-term ceilings. The long game, by contrast, looks irrational in the moment. It involves saying no to opportunities that offer immediate status. It involves choosing foundations over visibility. It requires the courage to be underestimated. This is where wealth quietly begins to form, not as a goal, but as a byproduct. When you focus on building leverage, learning deeply, and thinking clearly, money becomes a symptom. It is the residue of having created value that persists. Wealth does not come from chasing money. It comes from becoming someone whose output compounds. This is why trying to get rich directly often fails. It narrows thinking. It introduces urgency. It distorts judgment. People who obsess over outcomes sabotage the processes that create them. When the system is right, results are inevitable. When the system is wrong, effort is wasted. This distinction reframes ambition. The question is no longer, how much can I make? It becomes, what kind of person am I becoming? A person with rare skills, a person with leverage, a person with patience, a person who thinks long-term. Money follows that trajectory naturally. This leads to a different definition of freedom. Freedom is not excess consumption. It is not the ability to buy everything you want. Those are superficial markers. Real freedom is the ability to choose, the ability to say no, the ability to walk away. Freedom is control over your calendar, control over your attention, control over what you work on and who you work with. It is the absence of forced trade-offs. True freedom is not doing whatever you want. It is not having to do what you don't want. Most people confuse status with freedom. They pursue symbols that look impressive but increase dependence. More expenses, more obligations, more expectations. The cage becomes more comfortable, but it remains a cage. Freedom often looks unimpressive from the outside. It is quiet, it is understated, it does not announce itself, but it is deeply felt by those who have it. The long game trades appearance for autonomy. It sacrifices early praise for lasting control. If you play it long enough, outcomes take care of themselves. Wealth is not the finish line. It is evidence. Evidence that you chose patience over urgency. Evidence that you chose leverage over labor. Evidence that you chose clarity over noise. In the end, the most important choice is simple. Not what you buy, not what you show, not what you prove, but what you refuse to do, what you refuse to rush, what you refuse to trade your time for. That is real freedom.